Good morning. To Reverend Sparks in his absence, to the leadership of the church, to the choir, to those who serve it, and to you all, I bid you good morning. I tell you, as I was sitting there, I was like, man, you all are really moving through your service quite quickly. Well, let me not be the one to slow it down. Amen. And so I always enjoy coming and sharing with you all, partly because Reverend Sparks is such a dynamic and good leader, good pastor, and good man. And so I just want to share how much I have affection for him and how much he's meant to me in my life as a minister, as a preacher. And I'm grateful that he would call me in his absence. So as I was thinking about this morning, as I was thinking about what to preach on Mother's Day, because when you start talking about specific days, you know, they can be easy, they can be hard. Right? And so I knew I couldn't just come up here and preach on a Mother's Day and not have some Mother's Day themed sermon and make it to the back door. You know, and so I was just sitting there thinking, well, what am I going to preach on? What am I going to talk about? What is God leading me to do? And so I began to think about women in the Bible. I began to think about just the list of women in the Bible. And as I began to think about it, you know, some women in the Bible, they either did not have children or that was not the focus of their story. And so they wouldn't work for this occasion. But then I thought about women like Sarah, right? And I thought about some comparison between Sarah and Janet Jackson, right? Because who would have thought either one of them would be pregnant? Yeah. I thought about that, but it didn't. That didn't pan out. That one didn't pan out. I thought about preaching about Jacob. You know, Jacob, he intended to have just one wife and ended up having to have 4 wives. And so, you know, that worked in that culture, but it didn't work for Mother's Day for this time, right? And so I thought, let's just keep it simple, right? And for today's text, I just want to share with you the story of Rebekah, right? And that story is found in Genesis chapter 24. And so we're going to cover Genesis chapter 24 through 27. And we're just going to share the story of Rebekah. So Rebekah is when you talk about her story, right, you can break it down into different phases. I like to break it down into phases. And you can't really begin to talk about her story if you don't go back and talk about the background. And so the first phase of her story is really the background about how she became and why she's so important in the text and in the Bible. And so we actually have to go back to Genesis chapter 23. And if you go back to Genesis chapter 23, you'll find that Sarah, the wife of Abraham, had died. Right? She had died, and Abraham was old, and he was concerned about who his son was going to marry. So he was concerned because his son could not just marry any woman. He couldn't take any wife because there was a promise that God had made to Abraham about continuing the lineage and continuing his line. And so what you will find in Genesis chapter 23, you will find Abraham calling his servant in to him and asking his servant to put his hand under his thigh and make an oath to him, make him a promise. And he wants his servant to make a promise that he will not take a wife for his son from the land or from one of the daughters of the Canaanites. And that's the land in which they dwelled in. And so he wanted the servant to go out of the country, to go back to his kindred homeland and to find a wife for his son. The other part is he wanted to make sure that if Abraham died, he wanted to make sure that his son did not go back to his kindred land. And so there was a reason why he did not want his son to go back to the kindred land, and that's because God had placed him in the place where he was at right then. And so I'm going to stop right here just to say, when God places you somewhere, no matter the difficulties, no matter what's going on, don't go back to where you came from. Stay where God has placed you, because that's where he's going to bless you. And so he couldn't go back to Mesopotamia. He couldn't go back to the land in which he came from. He had to find a wife from there, but he had to stay in the place where he was at. And so the servant, he begins to head back to Mesopotamia, and he goes back to the city of Nahor. He was going to find a wife for his master's son, Isaac. Right. So when he gets to Nahor, he begins to pray to God, and he asks God, well, let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink. And who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one to whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. And so this serves as a reminder to us on today that sometimes when you're looking for a wife, that you have to actually be looking for a wife. All right. Sometimes, whether we believe it, they really just don't fall out of trees. You have to actually be looking for a wife. Right. And so not only are you supposed to be looking for, you have to be looking for a wife, you have to know that you're looking in the right place. Right? But not only are you to be looking for a wife in the right place, what the text has already shown us is that you also have to be in prayer. Right? But not only are you to be looking for a wife in the right place in prayer, you also have to be ready to receive the blessing. Right. And so in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 22, it says that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. And so we see in this first phase, we see this background of why Rebekah comes into the story in the line into this biblical story. So in the second phase, we meet Rebekah for the first time. Right? We meet her as a daughter. We meet her as a sister. Right? Because it was no sooner than the servant finished praying to God that he sees Rebekah. And so he sees Rebekah, and then in the text, it describes her as being a young woman who was very attractive in appearance, as a maiden whom no man had ever known. And so he goes to Rebekah, and he asks for some water. Right. And so the thing about Rebekah that he didn't know at the time, see, Rebekah was born to Bethuel. Bethuel is the son of Milcah. He is the wife of Nahor, and is Abraham's brother. Right? And so it's important that we know this about the text, because that means that all of the requirements that Abraham had given to his servant, she fits those requirements. Right? And so the servant, he sees Rebekah, and he unknowingly all this information, he goes to her and asks for a drink of water. And so not only does she give him a drink of water, she then volunteers to give his camels water as well. And so the servant, he gets excited. He sits back, he looks, and he watches her how she works, how she operates, because he knows, he's remembering the prayer that he had already prayed. And so the text, it tells us that once she finishes watering the camel, he requests to see if there is room at her father's house that he and the group that he was traveling with, that they might stay the night. And so when she says yes, there is room, well, then he rejoices. He rejoices, and he gives her a ring for her nose, and he places gold on her wrist. Right? And so the text, it says about 10 shekels of gold. And so what that really means is he gave her about, we'll say somewhere around 4.5 ounces of pure gold. Pure gold. It's hard for us to imagine really pure gold. And I couldn't really imagine, and why I like to kind of delve down in little bits and pieces of the text like this, because it adds context to what we're talking about. But I had a chance to study Christianity in Ghana, West Africa. And I'm walking through the museum, and I'm looking at different photos, and I'm looking at gold. And one of the tour guides began to talk about some of the differences between the United States and Ghana. And one of the things he talked about was the gold. And he said that if the United States were to bring the gold that we use to Ghana and try to sell it, that they would be laughed at. Right. So that pure gold and the gold that we use is totally different. And so we're talking about pure gold, a gold that comes from the earth, that was unrefined, there are no additives to it. It's pure gold. And so everybody can't have pure gold. And so there was clearly, he came from a place of wealth. But in any case, he places this on her hands. He gives her the ring, and she goes and she tells her household what has happened. And so we see Laban, we see her brother who once he finds out what's happened, he leaves the house, he runs to the spring because he wants to see this gentleman. He wants to meet him. And after meeting him, he invites him back to the house, and he's very hospitable. And I always wonder at this point in the text is that the reason that Laban invited him to the house was because he saw the gold and he wanted to bring him into the house, or was it because it was Abraham's kindred? In either case, we see Laban inviting him to the house. And so the servant and the people he was traveling with, they go to the home, they wash their feet as it was custom. They sit down at the table and they get ready to eat a family meal. And it's at that time that the servant, he then reveals why he has come to Mesopotamia, why he's come to the city of Nahor. And so he tells a whole story from the beginning, from when his master charged him up until now. And so they're sitting at the table and they are listening to the story. As I'm reading this, I can tell you that it's always strange to me. Every time I read this text, and I've read it many times, it's always strange to me. Because at the end, Laban and Bethuel, that means Rebekah's father, they say this thing is this is from the Lord. So yes, go ahead. You can take my daughter, you can take my sister to marry Isaac. Right? And so the servant, he's ready to leave on the next day, and they want to slow down. They're like, well, give us 10 days. And the servant is like, well, let me go on my way. And so they asked Rebekah, will you go with this man? And she agrees to go. Now this is what I find strange about this story. Just think about it, right? I watch a lot of TV. You already know that. I read, I try to read books and read stories. You already know that. But as you're reading this story, this is kind of how it just lays out in the outline form. A stranger shows up in your town you've never met before with some gold, saying that he wants to take your daughter back to a foreign land to marry somebody else's son. And you say it's okay. Right? That's just strange to me. That's strange to me, right? But I have to remind myself that this is a different culture than the one we live in on today. And so the series of events that happen in this story might not be as far-fetched as I might think they are. Right? But it also makes me think of the various ways that people meet. Right? You can hear commercials about singlesmeet.com or christiansinglesmeet.com. You hear stories about people meeting in grocery stores. You hear stories about people meeting in just walking by and it's this glance and this automatic love attraction. You hear all of these different things. Me, myself, my wife and I went out on a business dinner, right? And I decided I was going to marry her that night, and the next day I started dating her. Right? Now, she'll say we started dating at different times, but just know that my story is the right story. Right? My story is the right one. But in any case, people meet in different ways. And so as I thought about the differences between that culture and this culture, there are also some similarities between the cultures. Right? And so the similarities that we find is that God is still in both cultures. Right? And so the same God whose hand was involved in arranging this marriage is the same God whose hand is still involved today arranging marriages. So it really doesn't matter as much how people come together, but it does matter if God is in the arrangement process. Right. And so in the third phase of the story, we see Rebekah as a wife and the mother. Right. And so in Genesis chapter 25, we find Isaac praying for Rebekah because she was barren. I had to stop again. I read the story. I read it a lot, but every time I read the story, I have to stop right there. So now you're telling me that the lady that you sent a servant from the land of Canaan, from the Canaanites back to Mesopotamia, that you went and you saw at the branch, that you gave the gold to, that you talked to the parents, that you gave them you gave them gifts and offerings as well, that you brought back to marry Isaac, is barren. Right. And she is so very important in this story. I know it's only one line in the entire story, but it's so very important because the promises that God made to Abraham runs through Isaac. And in order for the promises to continue to move forward, that means Isaac has to have an heir. Right. And so what this communicates to me is that just like mothers and wives, just like they're always praying for somebody else. Right? That sometimes there's some situations that happen in life. That sometimes the things that happen that they need prayer, they need to be prayed for as well. Sometimes we all need a little help. There's some things we just can't handle all on their own. And so as you move through the text, you see that Isaac, he prayed to God and that God listened. God listened and Rebekah became pregnant. She became pregnant with twins. And what's interesting about it is that the twins, they fought in the womb. And so they fought to the point where Rebekah, she asked God, well, what's going on inside of her womb? And so it was God who told her that there were two nations in the womb, that there are two peoples from within you, and they shall be divided, and that one shall be stronger than the other, and that the younger would rule, or the older would serve the younger. And so what that is telling us this morning is that there are some circumstances that happen in life. No matter how great a wife you are, no matter how great a mother you are, that you can't handle alone, that you yourself have to turn to God. And so in the text we see that Rebekah, she gives birth to twin boys, Esau and Jacob. And the text tells us that Isaac, he favored Esau because Esau had hunting skills and liked to be outdoors. But Rebekah, she favored Jacob. So in Genesis chapter 27, right? In Genesis chapter 27, Isaac, he tells his oldest to go and prepare for him a meal, right? So that he could bless him, because now Isaac has gotten old. Isaac, his vision has gone. And he's preparing to bless his oldest son to transition the responsibility of the household over to him. Right? But the text tells us that Rebekah was listening. She was listening. Now, back before there were cell phones and social media, all you had was landlines. Right? Yeah, exactly. Right? And so I've heard stories about you talking on the phone and you trying to plan, you trying to get over, and you trying to figure out how you're going to operate and move, only if you stop and listen, you'll hear breathing on the other line because Mama was listening. Right. Or I don't know, but it happened to me that anytime there was a hush in the house and things just wasn't as noisy or wasn't going like they're supposed to be, all of a sudden you see Mama standing next to the door, dusting the wall. Like Mama was listening, right? And so there was very little that happened in the household that Mama didn't know about. She seemed to be everywhere because Mama was listening. And so the text tells us that Rebekah, she was listening. And so Rebekah, she involves herself in this situation. She involves herself in the situation because she wants Jacob to be blessed. And so she gives Jacob instructions on what to do while his older brother has gone out to capture the game and prepare the food for his father. Now, there's no way to get around this, right? There's no way to sugarcoat this. Rebekah and Jacob tricked Isaac. There's no way to get around it. That they intentionally deceived Isaac, and Jacob stole the birthright from Esau. Now, I know that we know that the Bible has already told us that God told Rebekah that the younger would rule the older, that the older would serve the younger. I know that the Bible tells us that. And I know that one of the ways for this to take place is for the younger to be blessed by the father, right? But as I'm reading the text, as I'm wrestling with this, the question that comes to mind, well, is that the only way? Right. I'm not sure about that. Is that the way that God intended for this to work, or did God allow Rebekah to operate in her own free will, knowing his plan was going to go forward anyway because he's God, right? And so it causes us to pause, right? It causes us to pause that even though that God has given us promises, he's told us sometimes, in instances, he's told us what he wants us to do. There's still a way that we are to go about doing it that's within God's will, right? And so that we don't have to deceive people in order for God's plan to go forward. And I'm always telling people, sometimes you find yourself in situations where people want you to defend God. Well, I don't have to defend God. God is God. And God is God all by himself. And so my job is just to share and point people to Jesus Christ. That's my role and that's my job. And as long as I do my job, then I know God's will, it's going to go forward. And I'm just included in it. And so we have to make sure that in our goings, in our dealings, in our comings, in our raising our children, in our communications with one another, that we are in the will of God and doing it God's way. Right. And so at the end of Genesis chapter 27, right, we see the story of Rebekah. We see that it ends. We see that Esau, he's now made up his mind to kill his younger brother. And that Rebekah finds out about the plan and sends Jacob off. She tells Jacob to leave, that his brother's going to kill him, and so she sends him off to live with her brother. And so I know that the story ends here, but I just know that there's a whole lot more to that story. Right? I just wish I could know more of the context, but this is all that the Bible shares for us, and so this is all that we have in order to help us know how we are to live in closer relationship with God. And so what is it that we get out of this story? What is it that we get out of this story? Well, one thing that I got out of this story that I want to share, and we'll be finished pretty soon, right? One of the things that I got out of this story is that every time a child is born, it's a miracle. Every time a child is born, it's a miracle, and it is to be celebrated. Even those babies that surprise you, even those babies that you thought you were finished. You thought you were finished, but there was just one more egg still left that was just hanging around in there. And so it's a blessing to be able to have a child. It's a blessing to be a mother. And there are many people today who want that opportunity, who want to be pregnant, but cannot get pregnant. That it's just amazing that even this Janet Jackson thing it's blown my mind that she will be 50 years old if she has a successful pregnancy. That she wants a baby so bad that she's willing to put her body through the process of pregnancy at age 50. I can say that from a different lens because now that I've watched what happens through the process with my wife, at age 50, I know she has money, but changing the diapers in the middle of the night and walking around half crazed and sometimes out of your mind, that's the desire. But there are people out there who want to have children so bad, right, that they're willing to go through that process at no matter the age. But I do want to take a moment of personal privilege and say right here that having a child naturally is not the only way to be a mother. That if you've ever taken care of somebody else's child, then you are a mother. That if you ever invested physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially to support a child, then you are a mother. That if you ever had to worry over a child, if you've ever laughed with them or cried with them, then you are a mother. Now, I recognize that everybody might not have had an ideal mother figure, right? For whatever reason, right? And I want to acknowledge that. I recently heard a story from a mother who was young in age, and she shared the story about she She got pregnant at age 20, and she ended up she got pregnant at age 20. She ended up having a baby. She was 21 years old. She was not in school, so she didn't have a college diploma. She had a high school diploma. She didn't really have any money saved up, but she was living with her parents. She got pregnant. She had the baby, and within 24 hours of having the baby, she said that her mother came into the doctor's room and told her that when she got out of the hospital that her stuff would be outside. And so here, this 21-year-old who's never lived on her own, who really doesn't have anything, has to figure out how she's going to take care of herself, how she's going to take care of her baby. Right. And so I'm not going to go into the details, but I listened to her talk about the details of having to figure out, well, one, how am I going to eat? And then from there she began to talk about, well, then am I going to work one job and spend some time with my child, or am I going to work two jobs and never see my child? And so there's some real issues and things that when people in poverty have to deal with when they have children that sometimes that we don't often talk about or really think about. There's some decisions that have to be made. Right. And so I began to listen to her tell this story. But what's interesting about it? What's interesting about it is that by the end of the story, I could hear a transformation in her voice. I could hear a transformation that turned from rejection and pain to a transformation to a place of provision and protection for her son. And so I tell you the story to say that whatever relationship that you might have with your mother, for whatever the reason, that it doesn't determine the relationship that we have with our children. Right? As a matter of fact, whatever the relationship that you have with your mother, it's going to help you with your relationship with your child. Right? And I say that because it doesn't matter if it's good or if it's bad, because it takes all of your experience to raise children. It takes all of our experience to raise our children. So it doesn't matter if you are 50 years old. It doesn't matter if you are 21 years old. It doesn't matter if you are a single mother, or it doesn't matter if you are a married mother. It takes all of the experiences that you've had and then some to raise children. Right? So the second thing I think it points out to us, the thought that came to mind as I'm reading through this text is that being a mother or a wife is no easy task. Thank you. Yeah, being a wife is no easy task. Just whether you are a mother or whether you are a wife and a mother, right? It's no easy task. Right? Just look at some of the stuff that Rebekah had to deal with, right? There was one instance where Isaac thought that he would be killed because of the beauty of his wife. Right? He thought he was going to be killed, and so what did Isaac do? Isaac tells Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, that Rebekah is his sister. Now, just in case anybody is thinking about trying that today, just let me go ahead and tell you, don't do it. It's not going to work. It's not going to work well for you. Now, so the Bible, it doesn't tell us their conversations, right? It tells us what we need to know. So it doesn't tell us what they talked about once she heard what he said. But I can guarantee you that once you get in the car, that you're going to have to deal with your wife in a way that it probably won't need to be written down either. It probably just needs to stay between you two. Right? All right. So Rebekah, she also had to deal with the fact that Esau, her son, that he married a Hittite woman, that he married outside of the promises of God, right? And so the text tells us that Esau, he made his parents' life bitter. He was making bad decisions, right? And so I don't know, are there any mothers in here who worry about the type of people that her children are hanging around, right? Are there any mothers in here today who worry about the type of man or woman that her children are dating or marrying? Yeah. Are there any mothers in here who worry about the type of people that her children are being around or who don't share the same family values? right? Are there any mothers in here who are worried about their children being led down the wrong path? And so these are things that Rebekah, as a wife, as a mother, that she had to deal with. But as I think about the entire story of Rebekah, there's one thing that stands out to me. And that one thing is that no matter what happened, everything that happened, it still happened within the context of the will of God. And so God, he made a promise to Abraham, and that same promise was communicated to Isaac. And everything that was happening, everything that Rebekah experienced in her life, it was moving towards God's original plan and his will. And so I want to encourage the mothers in here on today that whatever happens in your life, whatever good things that happen, whatever bad things may happen, whatever trials and tribulations you might have in your marriage, whatever trials and tribulations that you might have with your children, that you're still living under the promise of God, and that you are still in God's will, and that he is still moving his will forward. And so it's not all on your shoulders. So you don't have to do it all by yourself, that you have help, that you have the comfort of the Holy Spirit. Right? Did you have the built-in mechanism of the family of the church, of this household, that you have help? And so that gives us hope. And so I just came by here to tell all of the mothers this morning that to keep on loving. Keep on loving God and loving your families, that keep on leading, keep on being the leaders in your household, that you keep on serving those whom you love, that you keep on praying for those whom you care about, that you keep on laughing with your family, that you keep on crying when the times come. But most important, that you just keep on being mama. Amen. Keep on being who you are. And so this is my prayer for you all on today. This is all I came by here to share, that you are in God's will, that God made you, that God knows you, and that God will keep you in your role as a wife, in your task as a mother. God bless you this morning. This is my prayer. Amen. And so it's funny when I'm reading through the Bible, it's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Right? That's what you see in the Old Testament. But there's also, because we are in the promise of God, that we are Christians, there's also the God of our mothers. Right? So as we open the doors of the church today, I invite you to come. That if you don't know Jesus Christ, if you don't know the God of our mothers, that if you have a mother that's been praying for you, who has been praying for you to come back and to turn your life over to Christ, to that God, then the doors of the church are open. The doors of the church are open for you to come and to turn your life over to Jesus Christ. Or if you've known Jesus Christ and your relationship has grown cold, and now's the time to come forward and to rededicate your life to Jesus Christ. And then the last, if you are looking for a church home, if you're looking for a place to worship God, if you're looking for a place that has family, that you can help raise your family and be a part of, then there's no better place than right here at 45th Street. The doors of the church are open. Won't you come?
Well, there it is. I hope you were blessed by God's word. It's my prayer that you will grow from this message. But in case you need a refresher, you can always stop by our physical location and worship with us at 7600 Division Avenue over in the Eastlake community. I believe one visit and you'll find out that we truly are the friendliest church from the parking lot to the pulpit. Looking forward to meeting you. God bless you. Take care.